guys? Hope you're well. I have some questions for you. Sorry if these ones have been answered, but I've been going through your webinars like a maniac, playing catch up. So a lot of information to digest there from the Semantic SEO banquet. I like that. I'm going to +1 that. When you're using the subdomain method, do you use the same blog to link to each subdomain if they're just different locations, or does each subdomain get its own blog? Each subdomain gets its own site, if that's what you mean. Like if you're talking about for like local, for example, and using subdomains, for different locations, then yeah, each subdomain is going to have its own blog. It's going to have its own WordPress install, if that's what you mean. I think that's what you're asking. And yes, each one's going to have a separate. Let's see, same blog to link. No, you wouldn't use the same blog to link to each subdomain. I'm not even sure what you mean with that. So yes, again, it's going to be each subdomain is going to have its own WordPress installation on it. Okay. If you use
and also, sorry, Bradley, but
Go
I
ahead.
think that each subdomain gets its own blog, yeah, and the same blog to link to each subdomain. I mean, each subdomain will be treated as a standalone money site, so they will get their own blog and they will get their own network as well. So, I mean, they will be treated as standalone.
Well,
money sites.
they can get their own network. It depends. You can use one single branded network for all subdomains if you wanted. It just depends on, it depends on what you need, it depends on how strong the competition is and what exactly you need. And I can't answer that for you in this question. There's not enough information. But like, for example, I do a lot of tree service stuff, and I've got a bunch of tree service sites on subdomains for this one particular company that buys leads from me. And we just have one branded network for that. And all the subdomains feed into that one branded network. And that's it, because it's not really necessary. I was able to accomplish with one network what I needed to. If you find that you have one branded network and you're not able to get the results that you want, then you can do subdomain specific networks, which essentially would still be the brand. It would still be a branded network, but you would add the geographic modifier in there, like the city name or however you divide up your however you build it out. So it's just because it's still the same brand, it's just a different location, right? So you could do that as well. If you don't use the same blog, or if you do just use the same blog, do you put the blog on a subdomain? Again, that's not what we do, so that's not how it would work. Is there a limit to how many subdomains you can use per money site? Would you only do a small geographic location, or is it countrywide okay? I would like to do an England-wide site, or would you just advise to go city by city and subdomain the suburbs? Well, see, I usually do state. Like I usually go by city subdomains, and typically my sites, I haven't really done any that are big enough to where I've had to do more than 10 or 12 subdomains. That's usually about as big as a contractor area, as a contractor wants to service. So you just got to remember, though, having subdomains is great because each site, like Hernan mentioned, is considered a standalone site. So that's also a good way to protect a brand or a domain, is by building out on subdomains, so that in case the subdomain catches a penalty, it's not going to destroy the root domain and all of the pages, posts, and subdomains attached to it. But you have to be careful, though, because I don't personally like to have a subdomain or a site with more than a dozen, 15 subdomains tops. Not that you can't, you certainly can, but I would just be careful with that. If you're thinking about doing something like like a directory site or something like that, then you could use multiple domains and just split it up a little bit. That's my own personal preference. Mm-hmm. But I know you can do more if you wanted to. So Hernan, what's your take on that?
Well, and this is for foreign niches. I mean, I know it's kind of different. I mean, you're going for England, and I've seen that big websites, when they're trying to go like countrywide, they will usually go subdomains, but they will use subdomains a bit different. Instead of going geographic, they will go niche-wise. Like, for example, I have this domain, and then on a foreign niche, and then I would go, for example, niche a.domain.com, and then all the cities. Then niche B, that it could be like, for example, credit cards.domain.com. Then it will be paydayloans.domain.com. Then forex.domain.com, etc. So if you're going that broad, I would suggest that you go for niche instead of, you know, state or something like that.
Instead of
But again,
location subs.
yeah, instead of locations, that you would use the locations as categories, you
Right.
know.
And silos.
But
Yeah.
right, yeah. So it's kind of interchangeable depending on how big your competition is. Because again, as Bradley was saying, if you're going for the states of the US, you will need to do 50 something, 52 different websites, you know, if that's
Yeah.
the case. So
Yeah. Okay, let's see. What advice do you have for turning the main site copy into unique for each subdomain? Sounds like a lot of work to keep the copy good if you have even a few clients. Yeah, it is. But my advice is, and this question gets asked often, and what I've always done for that is I just hire different writers for each location. If that's how, and again, if Hernan was, and apparently that's what it sounds like you're doing is more location instead of niche division. But what I always do is just hire different writers. So that way it's 100% unique. Instead of trying to use the same content across multiple sites and changing it, because then you get into spinning and all that, I just hire different writers so that it's completely unique content for everyone. And it's just a cost of the build. So I just factor that in when I'm projecting my costs out for whatever project it is that I'm working on. It's just part of, it's just part of a build. So, and it's not that expensive. But you can go to places and get content, from 15 different writers if you needed to, and that way you're going to have 15 unique versions of copy for, and the only thing that's going to be, it'll be for different areas, but they're all going to be unique versions anyways because they're written by completely different people.
mm-hmm.
So that's how I do it.
Yeah, and here's the deal. I mean, it would all depend on, because going after a big website, like going after, I don't know, all of the dentists in United States, all of the states, that's a big project,
Yeah.
And sometimes you need, like, it's a 2 or 3 years project, and sometimes you need a big team and a big chunk of change to make it work.
But, yeah.
Yeah, so what we usually advise is that you go as Bradley is doing, go for a market in an area. Then once you're monetizing that, you use that money to expand, because and we've heard a lot of people, going after the big price, which is completely fine, but you need to make a living out of that, and that's an expensive project. If you have the team and if you have the resources, go for it. But usually if you're a one-man gang, which is, the majority of our students, then we would suggest that you go one state at a time, that dominate it, and move on to the next state, because again, you will be building domain authority and trust flow as you move forward and as you take over more and more states. So the states that you start building subsequently will be easier than the first one, because the first one, the domain was virgin, quote unquote. So right. I think that's
a good point, because I would start with a particular region and build that out first, because like Hernan said, you want to start generating revenue. All too often we get people that submit questions to us and through various forums with these huge projects that they want to start with, and they take hours developing a strategy and even graphics to correspond with it when they ask the question, and they present us with this freaking novel of information with graphics and designs and structural designs and all of this, and it's like so overcomplicated. And it's like, why don't you just get started with one city, one location, and get that monetized, get it ranked, get it monetized and generating revenue, and then build upon that, because you're going to learn so much along the way from just building out one location to begin with, and start developing processes along the way. And that's the other recommendation that I have, is that when you start off with a smaller location, a smaller area, whether it's a city or a region or whatever, then as you're going through the process of building that out, make sure that you're documenting the process so that you can really systematize it. So, because especially if you're talking about doing something on a large scale, like what you're talking about here, Mark, you're going to want to have that systematized as quickly as possible so that it can scale. If you're doing this on your own, or if you're just doing it, bits and pieces at a time, and you're not actually documenting a process for it, then it's going to end up becoming a very cumbersome and time-consuming task that instead could have been systematized and outsourced or scaled very, very quickly once the process is in place. right? And then you'll also have cost projections and everything else figured out, which is really, really important as well, because it's all too easy to invest too much time and money into a project before it starts to give a return, and you don't want that, right? You want to be profitable as quickly as possible, both in revenue and with your time as well. You want to get your time back too. So, sounds like a good project. Recommend you start small and then build from there. You can always build upon successes and eliminate failures